I'm completely pinned inside a mass of scrap metal the size of a truck, unable to move an inch. That 15-ton Stryker armored vehicle has been flattened into a pancake, wedged just inches from my nose. If you were here, you'd lose your mind too, because this massive steel beast was slammed back into the plane's cargo hold from 2,000 feet up by some unknown monster outside. Green, sticky hydraulic fluid drips from the deformed chassis above me, plopping onto my bulletproof vest. The cold liquid seeps into my neck, giving me goosebumps. The rear of the plane has no door left. The pitch-black high-altitude wind howls wildly, rushing into the cargo hold. The wind is so strong it sends fragments of my teammates' high-altitude parachute helmet flying everywhere, smacking against the metal panels around me. My ears ring with a deafening buzz. Just moments ago, in a split second, a gray shadow bigger than a truck flashed to the tail of the plane. That thing had enormous claws that dug straight into the steel edge of the door. The claws scraped against the metal, producing a piercing, teeth-grinding screech. Then came an unimaginably violent impact. The force was so immense that it shook the entire 4-engine giant transport plane violently in midair. The plane's tail began to drop uncontrollably toward the ground. My body lost all balance, sliding backward as the plane tilted. I desperately grabbed a deformed steel pipe with my right hand, my palms slick with cold sweat. The red warning lights in the cargo hold started flashing frantically, casting the twisted metal around me in a glow that made it look like the inside of some terrifying monster's belly. That massive gray shadow outside was still moving. It hadn't fallen off. Its giant claws were still gripping the wreckage of the tail. Every time it exerted force, the whole plane emitted a metallic creak as if the metal was about to snap. Wind howled through the gaping hole in the back, sucking toolboxes and ropes from the floor into the high sky. All I could do was stare at the tens of thousands of pounds of scrap metal above me, watching it slowly press down with a heavy, despairing groan. Rewind 10 minutes. Back then, we were flying steadily at 2,000 feet. The rear cargo door was wide open, and the cold high-altitude wind blasted into the cabin, stinging our faces. My teammate Bob and I stood on either side of the steel rails, holding inspection boards, doing a final check on a massive Stryker armored vehicle. Under strict orders from above, we were supposed to airdrop this 15-ton hunk of metal from here. But just as we were about to start, the indicator lights on the dashboard began flickering erratically. The green lights would go out, then come back on, dazzling our eyes. I shouted at Bob, asking if he noticed anything wrong. That's when I caught a particularly strange detail. The tow parachute rope, which should have been streaming straight back toward the plane's rear, suddenly veered sideways in midair. The thick rope shifted to the left, and the way it bent was unnaturally rigid, as if an invisible giant hand had snapped the wind's direction in midair. Bob noticed it too. He tapped my shoulder and pointed a thick finger toward the darkness outside the door. Outside was a vast, dead layer of clouds. There was no lightning or thunder in those clouds. But oddly, rings of gray shadows were glowing within the black clouds, spreading outward like ripples from a stone thrown into water. Just then, the red light above turned green. The airdrop program started on its own. With a loud bang, the iron lock securing the armored vehicle snapped open. The guide parachute outside the cabin deployed with a sharp crack in the gale. The immense pull dragged the 15-ton armored vehicle, slowly sliding backward along the rails beneath our feet. I could clearly feel the violent vibrations of the steel wheels rolling through the soles of my boots. A rumbling roar echoed through the cargo hold. The massive body of the armored vehicle inched backward, just as the front half of the vehicle extended past the tailgate. The black clouds outside split open in the middle. A colossal gray thing dove straight down from the high sky above us. It fell as fast as a rock, but showed no sign of slowing down. In a completely unnatural motion, it spread its bony giant claws in midair, and with a sharp crack, clamped down hard on the chassis of the falling armored vehicle. The 15-ton steel body of the armored vehicle was suspended midair in the grip of that thing, frozen solid. The two soldiers near the rear ramp reacted the fastest. They had been holding onto the fixed steel cables nearby, and the moment they saw that massive gray shadow clutching the armored vehicle and hovering in the air, they started screaming at the top of their lungs. The wind howling in from outside twisted their shouts into distorted sounds. As they yelled, they frantically raised their weapons. Flames instantly lit up the pitch-black tail section of the aircraft. Bullets streamed out one after another, dense tongues of fire flickering in the gale. All those rounds struck the gray, hard shell of the monster. The scene was bizarre. The bullets couldn't penetrate the creature's body at all. Instead, they sparked off in a dense shower. The noise was like thousands of tiny hammers pounding relentlessly on dead iron, clanging and ringing, so sharp it deafened the ears. The bullets were deflected one by that tough, gray carapace. Flattened and bent copper casings clattered onto the cargo floor, rolling everywhere, scorching the metal and sending up wisps of white smoke. Some rounds even ricocheted back, whizzing past my ear and leaving dents in the aluminum cabin wall behind me. The gray monster hanging in midair wobbled from the hail of bullets. Its massive wings suddenly snapped inward. Those wings had no bird-like bones. Instead, for fleshy stalks as thick as thighs connected them to its body. The stalks contracted and expanded wildly, looking like 4 giant hydraulic pumps working at full throttle. As the wings flapped, a low, rumbling hum emanated from its muscles. The sound was so loud it made the steel floor beneath my feet vibrate. This creature was holding a 15-ton armored vehicle, yet it wasn't dragged down to the ground by that heavy hunk of metal. Instead, leveraging the forward momentum of our aircraft, those 4 thick stalks jerked backward, and then its 2 bony claws swung in a massive arc. Like throwing a shot put, it hurled the Striker armored vehicle, already halfway out the ramp, back along the slide rails, slamming it back into place. It happened too fast, and it was too heavy. The 2 soldiers still by the slide rails couldn't even move a step. The space behind them was cramped, packed tight with fixed brackets and chains. When the armored vehicle came crashing back, it carried a terrifying gust of wind. The massive vehicle's chassis slid backward along the steel rails. In an instant, the 2 soldiers were hit by the thick, bulletproof rear of the armored car. There was a sickening crunch of bones breaking, crack, crack. The armored vehicle didn't stop. Its immense inertia, carrying tens of thousands of pounds, shoved their bodies hard into the steel fixed brackets nearby. The triangular iron brackets used to secure cargo snapped off from the floor slots under the colossal impact with a sharp crack. Broken, jagged iron bars flew wildly through the cargo hold. The 2 soldiers, mixed in with the twisted, deformed brackets, were pushed along the floor by the reversing steel beast. 2 dark red streaks were instantly gouged into the black cargo floor. Bob was right beside me. Seeing this, his eyes went wide with terror. He dropped his detection panel, shouting "run," while frantically reaching for the safety straps meant to secure his body. But the armored vehicle was coming back too fast. The protruding bulletproof armor on its sides snagged the hydraulic lines on the left side of the cargo hold. With a snap, the thigh-thick lines were torn apart on the spot. Hydraulic fluid sprayed out like a high-pressure water jet, turning everything around into a mix of green and red. The slippery liquid covered the floor. Bob's feet slid out from under him, and he fell flat on his face near the slide rails. He lay on the ground, scrambling forward with his hands and feet while looking back. The armored vehicle's massive black tires rolled along the floor right behind his heels. The tires screeched against the steel deck, leaving black rubber marks and a pungent, acrid smell. I was standing near the front bulkhead at the time. Seeing the armored vehicle bearing down like a wall, I threw myself with all my strength into a dead corner on the right. My bulletproof vest slammed hard into a solid metal box, making stars explode in my vision. Just as I dove into that corner, the 15-ton armored vehicle scraped past the soles of my boots and crashed into the support beam in the middle of the cargo hold. Thud! The impact sent the entire C-130 transport lurching violently upward. My head slammed directly into an oxygen mask box that had torn loose from the ceiling. The support beam buckled completely under the strain, warping into a grotesque arch. The armored vehicle's front end twisted sideways, wedging itself firmly in the middle of the cargo hold and cutting me off completely from the rear ramp. I lay sprawled on the floor, my ears filled with the shriek of the aircraft's engines pushed beyond their limits and the crackle of sparking, severed wires. The air reeked of burnt plastic and thick engine oil. Struggling to lift my head just a little, I peered through the narrow gap between the armored vehicle and the fuselage toward the rear. The two soldiers who had been stationed by the ramp were nowhere to be seen. They were pinned beneath the chassis of this steel beast. The heavy-duty chains, once unbreakable, now lay scattered in several pieces across the oil-slick floor. Cold wind continued to howl through the gaping hole at the rear, sweeping up loose papers and debris into the air. The wedged armored vehicle screeched with each violent shudder of the plane, its metal grinding against metal, causing the oil on the floor to ripple like waves with every movement. Then I saw it. At the end where the vehicle was lodged, in the shadows flickering with the wind, a massive gray claw tip slowly emerged from the edge of the steel plate, digging deep into the mangled frame of the vehicle. Suddenly, the huge gray claw gripping the armored vehicle's edge retracted. With its disappearance, the immense force that had seemed on the verge of tearing the plane apart vanished. The armored vehicle wedged in the cargo hold shuddered violently a couple of times before settling, firmly stuck within the support beams. Outside the rear ramp, the shadow of the enormous gray wings seemed to be swept backward by the propeller-driven gale, drifting farther and farther away until it vanished into the pitch-black night sky. The world beyond the ramp returned to a deathly darkness. A burst of static crackled in my ears. The radio mounted on the fuselage wall. The pilot's voice came through, strained and shrill with tension, shouting questions about what had happened, why the aircraft's center of gravity had suddenly shifted to its limit, why the nose kept pitching up uncontrollably. I lay on a cold, slick metal floor, gasping for air. My body armor was soaked with sticky oil from ruptured high-pressure lines. I tried moving my legs. They hurt like hell, but nothing seemed broken. Leaning against the cold fuselage, I stared at the armored vehicle now reduced to scrap. With the creature outside, no longer attacking, I dared to hope it had flown off. After all, it had just expended tremendous force, hurling a 15-ton behemoth like a stone. It must have drained its energy. The plane was still flying, albeit erratically. Though the engines screamed in protest, at least we were still airborne, not plummeting from the sky. An eerie quiet settled over the cargo hold. Apart from the roar of the engines and the wind rushing in, there was no other significant sound. But soon I noticed something very strange. The temperature in the cargo hold was dropping at an unnatural rate. We were at 2,000 feet. The wind outside was cool, but not this cold. Now, my breath fogged into white clouds in the air. A biting chill seeped through the gaps in my body armor, stiffening my finger joints. Stranger still was the green engine oil spilled on the floor. It should have been a viscous liquid, but now it was visibly hardening. A thick, gray crust, like the dull eyes of dead fish, formed over the surface. I nudged it with my boot toe, and it cracked like brittle plastic with a dry tap-tap. From beneath the chassis of the armored vehicle blocking my path, a clear, sticky fluid began to drip. It wasn't oil or antifreeze. The substance stretched into long, stringy strands as it fell onto the crusted oil, emitting a foul, stagnant odor like mud from a polluted ditch. The red emergency light above continued to flash. In its pulsing glow, I could see that the clear fluid seemed to contain tiny white tooth-like particles. I stared fixedly at those small, hard objects scattered in the oil slick and realized they were trembling faintly, emitting an almost imperceptible grinding sound. Suddenly, the Stryker armored vehicle jammed in the middle of the cargo hold began to shake violently. The massive vehicle body swayed wildly on the bent steel rails, emitting deafening, clanging noises. I stared fixedly at the thick, bulletproof steel plate. On the originally smooth, green-painted surface, several large bulges suddenly and inexplicably protruded. Something was desperately pushing from the outside. Then came another ear-piercing sound of tearing metal. With a sharp crack, the sturdy side armor of the armored vehicle was pierced directly. 6 enormous gray bone claws forced their way in from outside. These claws resembled giant hydraulic pliers, coated in a transparent, stringy mucus. They frantically scraped against the steel surface, each movement leaving deep, white-scarred dents in the bulletproof plate. The monster hadn't left at all. It was now clinging to the other end of the armored vehicle, using this 15-ton steel behemoth as both a shield and a massive battering ram. It was exerting its full monstrous strength to push the vehicle step by step deeper into the aircraft cabin. The armored vehicle's tires screeched sharply against the frozen black floor. With every centimeter it advanced, the steel rails on the ground were forced apart, and the rivets that burst loose flew around the cargo hold like bullets. I curled myself tightly into the corner, watching as this 15-ton wall of scrap metal drew closer and closer to me. But stranger things were yet to come. Suddenly, a massive gray object pressed against the armored vehicle's jammed windshield, completely filling it. It was a huge, horizontally split maw. The splits slowly widened, revealing densely packed, white hard lumps inside, all resembling human molars. Hundreds, even thousands, of human-like molars were now crammed into that gray, fleshy opening. The teeth began frantically grinding up and down, engaging in rapid, high-frequency friction. Asterisk creak, creak, creak. Asterisk the noise was as loud as hundreds of chainsaws simultaneously cutting through a dead iron pipe. The sound traveled through the armored vehicle's steel plates and the cabin wall I leaned against, directly penetrating my skull, making my own teeth ache and tingle. The monster's mouth pressed hard against the thick bulletproof glass, pushing forward. Under the friction of hundreds of molars, the glass instantly became covered in fine white cracks before finally shattering with a loud pop into countless glittering fragments. The entire nose of the C-130 transport plane began to tilt upward in despair. I could feel my body sliding down along the floor. The weight at the tail now far exceeded the aircraft's limits. The 4 massive engines at the front screamed in overloaded frenzy, their roars violent enough to seem on the verge of explosion. But no matter how desperately the propellers churned the air, the entire transport plane was being dragged backward by the monster's weight. A safety strap beside me suddenly snapped under the pressure. The captain's shouts over the radio had turned into distorted screams. He was desperately pulling the control stick, frantically yelling over the radio that the plane was about to stall, that its tail was about to hit the sea surface behind. The red lights in the cargo hold flashed faster, their crimson glow illuminating the giant claws protruding from the armored vehicle, turning the gray keratin shells blood red. The monster's large wings beat violently outside. Each contraction of its 4 thick, fleshy stalks sent a swirling gust of cold wind rushing into the cargo hold. The engine oil frozen into hard shells on the floor began to shatter in sheets under the monster's monstrous push, turning into gray powder that floated chaotically in the air. Bob was right beside the armored vehicle's path. He had just half risen from the ground when the vehicle's protruding side mirror frame grazed his helmet and slammed into the cabin wall behind. With a sharp crack, the iron frame smashed a wall-mounted fire extinguisher, spraying white powder everywhere. White mist mixed with black oil smoke. I could only vaguely see the armored vehicle's massive wheels still rolling inward step by step. With each forward movement, the main beams of the cargo hold floor emitted a desperate cracking sound. The monster's gray bone claws had now shredded the rear half of the armored vehicle. From its large, molar-filled mouth, it began spewing massive amounts of transparent mucus. The mucus poured like a torrential rain through the shattered windshield, drenching the deformed seats and the dashboard ahead. Where the mucus landed, the steel began to emit black smoke and hissing corrosion sounds. My fingers were clawing desperately at the seams of the steel plate, my nails tearing until blood seeped from the beds. I watched helplessly as that wall of scrap metal, along with the gray monster bristling with human teeth, pushed us inch by inch toward our final doom. The steel partition door to the front cockpit had already begun to warp and buckle under the insane pressure from the armored vehicle. A massive bulge swelled at the center of the heavy iron door, its green paint cracking and flaking off in pieces that clattered to the floor. Overhead, every red and yellow alarm was screaming its lungs out, the piercing sirens grating against our eardrums until they ached. Bob had completely lost it. He scrambled up from the floor, howling at the top of his lungs as he stumbled and crawled toward the small emergency hatch nearby. One of his shoes was long gone, and he stomped barefoot across the oil-slicked, debris-strewn floor, leaving a trail of bloody footprints. He didn't care. He just threw himself at the hatch's red emergency handle, gripping it with both hands and yanking with every ounce of strength he had. The handle groaned and creaked under the strain, but with the entire aircraft's frame warped, the hatch was jammed shut, refusing to budge. When the door wouldn't open, Bob spiraled further into madness. He spun around, yanked the field machete from his belt, and began hacking wildly at the safety harness tethering him to the plane, all while screaming incoherently. The thick nylon rope frayed under the blade's savage blows, white fibers spraying into the air. "Let me out! Let me out!" he shrieked, tears and snot streaking through the grime on his face, leaving pale trails in the black grease. Before he could sever the harness completely, the armored vehicle wedge between us suddenly gave way under unimaginable force. With a deafening bang, a bulletproof steel plate the size of a wash basin shattered under the pressure and shot outward. Spinning like a deadly discus, it whistled past Bob's cheek, the gust of wind shearing half his helmet off and exposing his tangled hair. The plate slammed into the cabin wall behind us, crunching through an entire row of densely packed hydraulic lines. Red hydraulic fluid erupted from the ruptured pipes like a torrential downpour, drenching both of us in scalding oil. Our heads, faces, body armor. My vision blurred as the thick, sticky fluid coated my eyes. I frantically wiped at them with my sleeve, all while the terrifying sounds of tearing metal roared in my ears. With the hydraulic lines severed, the plane tilted even more violently in the air, its tail now pointing almost straight down as it plummeted toward the ocean below. I knew that if we let the gray monster keep pushing like this, within 2 minutes at most, this C-130 transport would stall completely and disintegrate into pieces mid-air. We'd all be finished. I swiped the red oil from my eyelids. Through the crimson glare, I spotted the only console still within reach, a metal box mounted in a dead angle on the right wall. Under a clear plastic cover was a single, massive red button, the emergency electro-explosive lock for the cargo bay's floor rail system. We were strictly forbidden from touching it during training. It was designed for critical airdrop failures, when cargo jammed on the rails and wouldn't release. Pressing that button would trigger high-voltage explosive bolts beneath the rails, driving massive steel teeth into the armored vehicle's chassis. Doing so would pit the aircraft's strongest structural frame against the monster's brute force. It was incredibly dangerous. The opposing forces were so immense they could tear the tail and rear fuselage clean off in an instant. But now it was our only chance, the last hope to generate enough counterforce to shake that gray monster loose from the vehicle. I didn't hesitate for a second. With my right hand, I ripped off the plastic cover, my oily fingers slipping slightly. I wrapped my left arm around a thick steel column anchored to the frame, bracing my entire weight against it. Then, with my right palm aimed squarely at that huge red button, I mustered every last ounce of strength in my body and slammed my hand down with everything I had. As my palm struck the button, an indescribable thud reverberated through the entire C-130 transport. The impact was so immense it felt like a giant iron hammer in the sky had slammed down hard on the back of our plane. In an instant, both my ears were ringing, my mind went blank, and the light before my eyes flickered several times. The explosive charges detonated simultaneously beneath the tracks, sounding like a series of dense firecrackers going off inside a steel box. Sparks, Countless yellow and red sparks erupted like dense little geysers from beneath my feet and the gaps in the steel rails under the armored vehicle's tires. It was a massive steel teeth along both sides of the slide rails, propelled by the explosive force, all springing out at once and clamping tightly onto the armored vehicle's chassis. Those steel teeth bit fiercely into the 15-ton steel undercarriage, producing a piercing, teeth-grating screech of metal scraping against metal. The entire plane lurched violently to a halt in midair. The sensation was as if our aircraft, thousands of feet in the air, had slammed headlong into a solid wall of reinforced concrete. My arms were wrapped tightly around the large steel keel column, and the tremendous inertia yanked my body backward with brutal force. I heard an extremely dull crack from the joint of my left shoulder. An intense, burning pain instantly shot up my arm. I knew my left arm had been dislocated on the spot by that immense force, but I didn't dare let go. My right hand clung desperately to the edge of the steel column, my whole body dangling in midair like a ragged cloth. The gray monster blocking the other end of the armored vehicle clearly hadn't anticipated this move. The vehicle suddenly jammed tight on the tracks, generating an enormous recoil force. That recoil traveled straight through the armored vehicle's steel plates and slammed into the monster's two massive claws. A deafening, ear-piercing sound of tearing metal screeched, *screech star. The monster's 6 gray, bony claws, dug into the bulletproof steel plates, were violently forced backward along both sides of the armored vehicle's body by the immense recoil. The claw tips gouged 2 deep trenches over a meter long and a palm's width wide into the thick bulletproof plating. Green paint and metal shavings from the edges of the steel plates flew off to both sides like rain. The monster was jolted backward, its enormous gray body completely exposed to my view in an instant. It was a creature covered entirely in a thick, stone-like, gray, keratinous shell. Its body was larger than a truck, with 2 massive wings frantically spread outside the plane's tail. The wingspan looked to be at least 30 meters wide. Supporting the wings were 4 fleshy stalks, each as thick as a human thigh. Those stalks were featherless, covered entirely in dark, rough skin like old tree bark, with muscles beneath pulsating rapidly. Its wide, horizontally split mouth gaped open. Inside, there was no tongue or mucous membrane, only rows upon rows of stacked white molars. Those teeth, exposed to the frigid high-altitude winds, clattered together furiously in anger, emitting a rapid, dense clack, clack, clack. The creature steadied its wings in the air, its 4 thick, fleshy stalks abruptly retracting inward. Then, in a motion that defied all natural laws, it executed a sharp, dead stop in midair without any wind resistance. Its wings flapped forward, and a whirlwind more violent than a typhoon swept into the cargo hold through the rear door. All the already scattered debris in the cargo hold, chains on the floor, wooden crates, and toolboxes jammed against the walls, were instantly lifted off the ground by the gale. They collided midair, smashing against the deformed bulkheads with a chaotic clatter. Bob had just struggled to his feet from the oil-slick floor. The field machete in his hand had long since been lost. The immense wind pressure hit him directly. Bob couldn't maintain his footing on the slippery floor at all. His body was lifted off the ground by the wind in an instant. Like a leaf, he tumbled along the edge of the jammed, armored vehicle, rolling toward the gaping hole behind. He desperately tried to dig his fingers into the gaps in the steel rails, but the floor was covered in red hydraulic fluid and frozen gray crust, too slippery to grip anything. His 10 fingers scraped 10 white streaks across the iron plating, but he still slid bit by bit toward the dark, high-altitude abyss behind. Seeing this, I yanked the issued M4A1 rifle from my chest with my right hand. Ignoring the searing pain in my left arm, I braced the stock firmly against my ribs with my right arm, aimed my index finger the trigger, and pulled it all the way down. Ha-ta-ta-tat, ha-ta-ta-tat. The rifle's muzzle spat out a long, blinding stream of fire. Bullets flew out one after another, all striking the monster's gray, hardened shell where it clung to the top of the armored vehicle. In the darkness, the dense sparks formed a continuous streak. The sound of the bullets hitting was like countless steel pellets smashing against concrete, clanging and clattering without end. But the bullets couldn't penetrate that thick gray shell. They deformed, flattened upon impact, and then clattered to the ground in a scattered mess. Still, the force of the bullets slowed the monster's movements, if only for a moment. Seizing the opportunity, I used my right hand to yank open the pocket of my bulletproof vest and pulled out a sticky explosive, originally meant for targeted demolition. It was a dark, iron lump shaped like a large duck egg. I clamped the safety pin between my teeth and yanked it out hard. Asterisk pa. Asterisk, I spat the pin onto the floor. Then, with every ounce of strength in my right arm, I hurled the now smoking explosive under the twisted chassis of the armored vehicle. The explosive rolled a few times across the grease-stained floor before thudding firmly into the iron bracket, connecting the armored vehicle's chassis to the monster's massive claw. The monster let out a shriek from its gaping maw. It didn't sound like anything alive, more like two slabs of raw iron, each weighing hundreds of pounds, grinding violently together at high speed. The noise made my vision blur and a sweet, metallic taste rise in my throat. Its four thick, fleshy limbs thrashed wildly in the air, creating a massive pressure wave that slammed me against the steel partition behind me, crushing me so hard I couldn't even draw a shallow breath. And in that very second, the sticky explosive detonated. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, a blinding orange fireball erupted beneath the armored vehicle's chassis. The shockwave blasted the already severed hydraulic lines and shattered metal fragments into a swirling cloud of debris. The explosion was devastating. The heavy bulletproof axle at the rear of the armored vehicle snapped in two with a sharp crack amid the flames. One of the monster's massive gray claws was clamped tightly around that very spot. The fireball exploded right against its claw, though it didn't shatter the bony structure. The sheer physical force, with unimaginable destructive power, wrenched the entire claw free from the axle. The recoil, combined with the plane's forward momentum, finally broke the balance. The monster's body lurched violently in the air. Its four huge, hydraulic-like limbs flailed irregularly as they lost coordination. Its other claw scraped fiercely across the deformed roof of the armored vehicle, tearing off a thick slab of bulletproof steel. But in the end, its body slid completely off the 15-ton steel beast, carried by its own immense inertia. The Striker armored vehicle, jammed in the middle of the cargo hold, now devoid of the monster's propulsive force, was still locked in place by the electrically triggered steel teeth. Combined with the violent forward lurch of the plane, it slammed forward along the rails with a heavy thud. The entire front of the armored vehicle smashed through the already deformed cockpit partition. Like an unstoppable wall of scrap metal, it wedged itself firmly and completely into the forward dead end of the cargo hold's keel, completely blocking the passage to the rear of the plane. In the last half second before the armored vehicle crashed forward, Bob threw himself desperately across the floor, his hands finally gripping a fixed iron ring behind the vehicle's tire. The massive steel body slammed into the dead end, just inches above his head, thudding into place without sliding back a single centimeter. The entire C-130 transport plane, trailing thick smoke, wobbled forward over the sea. The propellers ahead continued their hoarse roar as the plane gradually stabilized its altitude and began to climb again. I collapsed onto the floor, slick with red hydraulic fluid and metal shards. My left arm was completely dislocated, now hanging limply at my side. Every jolt of the plane sent a searing pain through me, drenching me in cold sweat. Bob lay sprawled near the tire, a shard of metal embedded in his thigh, his pants soaked red. He didn't cry out, just clung to that iron ring, his eyes fixed blankly on the crushed armored vehicle ahead. The rear of the cargo hold was now completely empty, just a gaping black hole. The frigid high-altitude wind still howled through, whipping debris across the floor with sharp, rattling sounds. Beneath the jammed tracks of the armored vehicle lay several broken triangular iron bars. Wedged between them were fragments of shattered white bones and torn pieces of clothing, remnants of the two companions who had been left by the hatch moments earlier. Thick black heavy-duty oil dripped from the iron bars, drop by drop, falling into the grooves below with a dull, lifeless plop plop. On the bulletproof steel plates of the armored vehicle, 6 deep claw marks remained. Each was as wide as a palm, with the steel torn open, exposing bright, gleaming metal edges. Within the crevices of the claw marks were dried, grayish transparent slime, now frozen into hard clumps, emitting a foul, stagnant odor like that of a dead, muddy ditch. Gritting through the pain, I propped myself up with my right hand against the floor, inching my body toward the edge of the shattered bulkhead. Through the gaping, pitch-black hole, I peered out into the night sky. Above the oppressive, lifeless clouds in the distance, within the thunderless dark clouds, the gray silhouette of a massive twin-winged creature continued to circle leisurely. Its 4 hydraulic, thigh-thick fleshy appendages flapped slowly. It was completely unharmed. There, high in the dark clouds, it followed our smoking, battered steel bird as we slowly drifted backward.